I've been a barber for over 20 years. And let me tell you something, when a man sits in my chair, it's not just his beard I shave. Sometimes it's his silence, his pain, his truth. They come in carrying more than just a tired face. CEOs, janitors, single dads, broken hearts. And in the hum of the clippers and the steam of a hot towel, they talk. They tell me things they've never told anyone else, real stories about love, loss, redemption. This one has stuck with me. He walked in quiet, worn down. The kind of quiet that doesn't come from shyness, but from carrying too much for too long. His name was Cole, a sound engineer once, now a father hanging by a thread. With his permission, I'm sharing his story today. The names have been changed, but the emotions, the moments, the truth, all of it is real. And it all started with a cry in the dark and a message from a stranger. Can you feel it? The heavy silence of a room built to decide fates, polished wood, black robes, and the eyes of justice, or something that looks like it. And in the eye of that storm, there they are. Look closely, Your Honor. This isn't kindness, it's a transaction. A desperate, unemployed father and a wealthy, mentally unstable woman trying to buy a replacement child with her money. She isn't saving this baby. She's endangering him. She is dragging an innocent child into her own emotional chaos. I demand that this court intervene before an irreversible tragedy occurs. An accusation as sharp as a dagger, a mother labeled insane, a father called irresponsible. But to understand the weight of this moment, to understand the fire in that man's eyes, we have to go back a few weeks to the very bottom of hell. This is Cole's world. No expensive suits or formal courtrooms, just four walls of desperation. And that sound, how did it all fall apart so fast? A few months ago, he was a talented sound engineer with a bright future. But then his wife died in childbirth, and now that grief had a companion. Failure. Fired for taking too much time off. On the verge of eviction. And his baby boy, the only remaining link to his late wife, refused to eat anything he was given. Liam wasn't just crying from hunger. He was rejecting this world, a world that had stolen his mother from him. Every cry was a needle in Cole's heart, reminding him that he was failing as a father, as a husband, as a man. In that room, drowned by the sound of rain and sorrow, Cole reached his breaking point. He had only one option left, a crazy, humiliating, and probably hopeless option. He opened his laptop, his fingers trembling on the keys, and began to type the words that would change his life forever. And that is where our story truly begins. Cole's hands trembled over the keyboard, each keystroke a small hammer blow to his pride. What was he doing? Begging for charity from strangers online. He, a sound engineer who once prided himself on creating perfect audio worlds, was now helpless against the sound of his own son's cries. But that cry, Liam's cry, was both his condemnation and his only remaining motivation. He took a deep breath, swallowed his shame, and began to type. He didn't write in generalities. He laid his entire naked truth bare. My name is Cole, he wrote on the Seattle Parents Network forum. I'm a single father. My wife passed away after childbirth. My son Liam was born premature and refuses every kind of formula. I've tried every brand, every temperature, everything, but nothing works. I recently lost my job and I'm at the end of my rope. I know this is a strange request, but is there anyone in the Seattle area who could share some breast milk? I'm not asking for a handout. I can work for it. I'm a sound engineer. I can fix electronics, speaker systems, computers. I can also do gardening, manual labor, anything. Anything to make sure my son can eat. Please. He read it over. Every word was a shattered piece of his life, exposed for the world to see. With a hesitant click, he hit post. And then the waiting began. It was worse than writing the post itself. The room was silent, save for the rain and the sound of Liam, who had temporarily cried himself to exhaustion. Every minute stretched into a century. Cole refreshed the webpage over and over, his heart hammering against his ribs each time the page reloaded. Nothing. Just other posts about diapers, first teeth, about the normal life he had lost. Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep back in. Maybe this was a stupid idea. Maybe no one cared. Just as he was about to close the laptop and surrender to the darkness, the screen flashed. A private message notification. His heart stopped. It was from an account with only a single letter, S. No profile picture, no bio. He held his breath and opened the message. 5 words. Just 5 words appeared on the screen. I can help. Send an address. No questions, no curiosity. It was brief, direct, and unnervingly mysterious. Cole felt a chill run down his spine. Was this real? Or some kind of cruel joke? He looked over at the crib where Liam was sleeping, his tiny chest rising and falling weakly. The risk was real, but the certainty of another night of his son crying from hunger was even realer. He typed out his address, then hesitated and deleted it. No, he couldn't let a stranger come to this rundown place. He retyped, deciding to meet at a public coffee shop. But a reply from S came instantly, before he could hit send. No, come to this address. It will be safer for the baby. An address appeared. It wasn't in downtown Seattle. It was on Bainbridge Island, a ferry ride away. Doubt surged in Cole again, but something in the phrase safer for the baby convinced him. This person was thinking about Liam. An hour later, Cole was on the road. His old pickup truck was like a wounded animal, groaning against the growing storm. The windshield wipers screeched desperately, trying to push away the sheets of water. The streetlights blurred like spilled watercolors. In the back, Liam was wrapped in layers of blankets, but was still stirring restlessly. The ferry crossed the sound in the dark, rocked by rough waves. Once on Bainbridge Island, the road became pitch black and deserted, flanked by the dark silhouettes of giant cedar trees. The GPS led him down a private drive with no other houses in sight. The steering wheel was cold in Cole's hands as doubt gnawed at his mind. Where was he taking his son? Finally, his headlights hit a massive metal gate. As it swung open automatically, Cole held his breath. Before him, emerging from the rain and mist, was not a house, but a fortress of solitude. A masterpiece of modern architecture with enormous glass walls and sharp black steel lines, perched on a cliff overlooking the roaring Puget Sound. The light from within cast a cold, unwelcoming glow. He parked, the contrast between his rusty truck and the multi-million-dollar structure making him feel small and out of place. He cradled Liam in his arms, the faint warmth from the baby the only thing grounding him to reality. Each step on the stone path to the front door felt heavy as lead. The wind gusted, threatening to tear the blanket from Liam. This was it, the point of no return. He stood before a towering, massive wooden door. There was no doorbell. He hesitated for one final second, his heart pounding erratically. Just then, Liam whimpered in his arms, a weak sound, but it was enough to shatter all his fear. For his son, he would do anything. Cole raised his hand, his fist not yet touching the hard, cold wood. Click! The heavy door swung open on its own, revealing a space inside that was overwhelmingly warm and silent. As the heavy wooden door glided open without a sound, a wave of warm, silent air washed over Cole and his son, wrapping them like an invisible blanket. It was a stark contrast to the biting wind and screaming rain at his back. He hesitated on the threshold, then stepped inside, and the door closed just as quietly behind him, completely sealing off the chaotic world outside. The silence within was stunning. It wasn't the silence of an empty house, but the dense, weighted silence of a cathedral or a grand concert hall before a performance. The air carried a faint, indescribable scent of cedar, old paper, and something clean like the air after a rainstorm. And then he saw her, the woman with the single-letter name S. She was standing in the middle of the vast living room next to an ivory-white armchair. She was not tall, her frame slender, almost fragile in a simple cream-colored cashmere sweater and pants. Her dark blonde hair was tied in a loose bun, a few strands escaping around her face. It was a classically beautiful face, but what held Cole's gaze were her eyes. They were a deep, stormy blue, and they held an ocean of sorrow, a sorrow that seemed to have been there so long it had become a part of her. She looked at him, then her gaze shifted to the small, trembling bundle in his arms. "You're Cole?" Her voice was low and melodic, with no surprise, only a calm confirmation. Cole could only nod, his throat dry. "Come in," she said, gesturing softly toward the chair. "Give him to me." It wasn't a command, but an urgent, almost pleading offer. A rational part of Cole's mind screamed warnings. What was he doing? Handing his only child to a complete stranger in an isolated house in the middle of nowhere. But when he looked into her eyes, he didn't see danger. He saw understanding, a painful empathy. She looked at Liam not like a stranger's child, but as if she were recognizing an old acquaintance. With a movement he couldn't control, Cole stepped forward and carefully placed Liam into her waiting arms. The moment her skin touched the blanket, a miraculous change occurred. Serafina, her name he would later learn, held Liam with an innate, gentle expertise. She sat down in the armchair, slightly adjusting the baby's position. She didn't rush. The room remained silent, save for the crackling of a modern smokeless fireplace. Then she began to hum. It was not a lullaby Cole had ever heard. The melody came from her throat, wordless, haunting, and melodic. It was like a sad sonata written for a cello, containing both pain and comfort. It was heartbreakingly beautiful. Cole, with his sound engineer's ears, stood frozen. He could hear every note, every subtle modulation. This was the music of a genius. Liam, who had been squirming, suddenly went still. He stopped crying. His tightly shut eyes fluttered open, as if he were listening. His tense little body slowly relaxed. A few seconds later, in a miracle Cole had prayed for on so many nights, Liam began to root, and then he latched. The heart-wrenching cry that had haunted Cole for weeks vanished. In its place was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. The steady, contented swallowing of a child who was finally full. Cole felt his knees go weak. He had to brace himself against the cold glass wall behind him to keep from collapsing. The invisible weight he had been carrying on his shoulders for so long, the weight of failure and fear, seemed to lift. Relief spread through his chest like a warm wave, so powerful it almost brought him to tears. He just stood there, watching silently. Serafina didn't look at him. All her attention was on the baby in her lap. The lullaby continued, softer now, as her hand gently stroked Liam's tiny back. In the soft light from the fireplace, Cole saw a single tear trace a path down her cheek, glisten, and fall onto her cream-colored sweater. She wasn't crying from sadness, nor from joy. It was something far more complex, a painful release he couldn't possibly understand. When Liam was full and had drifted into the most peaceful sleep of his life, Serafina continued to hold him, gazing at his angelic face. Cole started, his voice hoarse. I don't know what to say. Thank you. Serafina looked up, her blue eyes meeting his. A sad smile touched her lips. Don't thank me, she said softly. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Her words hung in the air. Cole didn't understand. Why would she thank him? He looked around the vast, perfect but cold room. He noticed the glossy black grand piano in the corner, covered in a thin layer of dust in a cloth sheet. He looked at the paintings on the wall, all of them seascapes and skies, not a single family photo. He suddenly realized this wasn't a home, it was a beautiful tomb, and he had just brought life into it. Serafina's words hung in the silent space, light yet heavy with a meaning Cole couldn't grasp. Thank him? He, a desperate, jobless man who had come here like a beggar. Why would she thank him? He looked at her, confusion plain on his face. As if reading his thoughts, Serafina shifted slightly, her gaze moving from Liam's sleeping face to the storm raging in the night beyond the massive glass wall. A year, 2 months, and 11 days ago, she began, her voice as even as if she were reading from an old diary. This house was filled with music. My husband David was a conductor, a brilliant, vibrant man. He believed everything in the universe had its own rhythm. We had a son, Leo. He had his father's eyes and his... She faltered, a spasm of pain crossing her face. He was 6 months old. She took a deep breath, as if drawing strength from the very air in the room. They were on their way to a concert in Vancouver, a private plane. The weather was bad, and they never arrived. So there it was, the simple, brutal explanation for everything. For the sorrow in her eyes, for the silence that suffocated the house, for the dusty grand piano in the corner. Cole felt his own chest tighten, not with pity, but with the deep empathy of someone who had also tasted sudden loss. Since that day, she continued, the music died in this house. The laughter, the footsteps, it all disappeared. All that was left was silence, and the estate, a very large estate. She said the last words with a hint of irony. David's brother, Preston, he visits often. He says it's to look after me, but really it's to manage the inheritance. He's always talking about securing my future, but I know he only sees the numbers in an account. Cole understood now. This wasn't a home, it was a gilded cage, a vast, luxurious space that imprisoned her in her own grief. Friends were too awkward to visit, afraid their cheerfulness would disturb the funereal atmosphere. Family was only interested in the money. Serafina was utterly alone. "I haven't heard a baby cry in this house for over a year," she whispered, her gaze returning to Liam. "I had forgotten what the sound of life sounded like. It's demanding and loud, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard again. So you see, Cole, I'm the one who should thank you. You brought sound back to this place." A profound, quiet understanding formed between the two strangers. They were two sides of the same tragic coin. One who had every material thing but had lost her purpose, and one who had nothing but was fighting to protect his only purpose. After a long pause, Serafina spoke again, her voice holding a hint of urgency this time. "Please bring Liam here every day, whenever he needs it. I need this." Cole, who had entered this house feeling inferior, now felt he had a role. He wasn't a burden. He was providing something money couldn't buy, but his pride wouldn't let him accept this help without offering something in return. "I will," he said with certainty, "but on one condition. I won't just sit here. I'll work to earn our keep, if you want to call it that." Serafina started to protest, but she saw the determination in his eyes and nodded. And so a new rhythm, a rhythm of healing, began to form in the silent house. Every morning, Cole drove Liam over. The scene repeated itself like a sacred ritual. Serafina would take Liam, hum new lullabies she seemed to compose on the spot, and Liam would drift into a peaceful, well-fed sleep. But afterward, while Liam slept, Cole didn't stay idle. The first day, he noticed the high-end surround sound system in the living room, which he guessed had been silent for a year. With Serafina's permission, he began to inspect it. He reconnected loose cables, tuned the amplifier, and wiped away the dust. The next day, his eyes fell on the neglected grand piano. He walked over and gently lifted the cloth cover. The ivory keys were cold. He didn't play it. He wouldn't dare intrude on that world. But he opened the lid and began to retune the strings, one by one. The dry ping-ping of the adjusted strings echoed in the space. Not music, but the promise of music to come. Serafina watched him from a distance, without a word. She saw him cleaning, fixing, bringing order and function back to things that had been forgotten. He was doing what she could not, starting to mend the broken pieces. It was a silent dialogue. Each day, he brought order and sound. In return, she brought life and peace to his son. Two broken souls in the silence of a house by the sea were slowly learning to heal each other, one note, one piano string, and one drop of warm milk at a time. The following weeks passed like a gentle dream. The house on the sound was no longer a tomb of silence. It had its own pulse. That pulse was the steady breathing of Liam as he slept in Serafina's arms, the soft clicks of the piano keys as Cole carefully cleaned them, and occasionally the hesitant exploratory chords that Serafina would quietly play when she thought no one was listening. The cloth cover on the grand piano was folded and put away. It was like an unspoken declaration that the period of mourning was over, making way for something new, however undefined. Cole, for the first time in months, felt a spark of hope. He wasn't just earning the rent for his son's life. He felt he was helping to restore a soul. He saw color return to Serafina's cheeks, saw the ghost of a smile when Liam did something funny. And Liam, the boy, was thriving. He was gaining weight, his skin was full, and his cries were no longer the screams of desperation, but the normal calls of a healthy baby. One afternoon, as Serafina was lulling Liam to sleep by the glass window, looking out at the sun-dappled water, Cole was in the kitchen, trying to fix her complex espresso machine. An almost perfect peace enveloped them. They had created a small oasis, a separate, safe world, protected from life's storms. But they had forgotten one basic thing. Glass walls, no matter how strong, are still transparent. The first intrusion wasn't a sound, but a glint of light. A short flash from the edge of the dense woods surrounding the property. Cole, with his sharp eyes, noticed it, but dismissed it as sunlight reflecting off something. He was wrong. A few days later, the peace was shattered. Cole had gone into town to buy some electronic components and stopped at the grocery store. As he stood in the checkout line, his eyes fell on the headline of a tabloid displayed at the rack. The large, bold, vicious letters hit him like a punch to the gut. Mad millionaire widow and her rent-a-baby. Below it was a grainy, long-lens photo, but it was unmistakably them. Serafina, in her cream sweater, holding Liam tenderly. The view through the glass wall was clear. The picture, which should have been a symbol of peace, was twisted into evidence of something sick. Blood rushed to Cole's head. His ears were ringing. He snatched the paper, threw money on the counter without waiting for change, and ran to his truck. Fury and fear churned inside him. He had to tell her. He had to protect her from this poison. He drove back to the island like a madman, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. But as he turned onto the private drive, he knew he was too late. A sleek black sedan, the kind that reeked of money and power, was parked in front of the main door. It was Preston's car. Cole stormed into the house without knocking. The scene before him confirmed his worst fears. Preston was standing in the middle of the living room, hands on his hips, with the air of a prosecutor. He wore a perfectly tailored suit, a stark contrast to Cole's own stained t-shirt and jeans. The crumpled tabloid lay on the glass coffee table. Serafina stood opposite him, her back straight, but her face was pale. Liam, thankfully, was asleep in his bassinet in the corner, oblivious to the gathering storm. "What a disgrace," Preston hissed, his voice dripping with contempt. "I warned you, Serafina. I told you to be careful. But no, you had to bring some vagrant and his kid in here, turn this house into a circus. Do you have any idea what people are saying? They're saying you've lost your mind since David's death. You're making a mockery of this family, dragging my brother's legacy through the mud." "Get out of my house," Serafina said, her voice trembling but firm. It was the first time Cole had seen her stand up to him. The strength she'd been building over the past weeks was being tested. "Oh, you've got a sharp tongue now, do you?" Preston sneered. "Got a stranger here to protect you?" He glanced at Cole with disgust. That's when Cole stepped forward, placing himself between Serafina and Preston. "You have no right to talk to her like that," he growled. Preston looked Cole up and down, a smirk playing on his lips. "I don't speak to the help. My business is with this woman who is destroying her family's reputation by playing mommy with someone else's child. Listen to me, Serafina." He turned back to her, his voice becoming cold and threatening. "The game is over. I spoke to my lawyers this morning. We're filing a petition with the court. We will prove you're mentally incompetent to manage your own affairs, and certainly not stable enough to be around a child. We are going to put a stop to this. For your own good, of course." The threat was made. The legal sword was drawn. The fight was no longer about vicious rumors. It had become a real battle to protect the fragile family they had just started to build. When Preston's black sedan disappeared beyond the gates, he didn't just leave behind a threat. He left behind a toxin, an invisible poison that seeped into every corner of their once peaceful space. The house fell silent again, but it was no longer the silence of grief or the peace of healing. It was the tense silence of a coming battle. Serafina stood motionless for a long time, staring at the empty space where Preston had been. Cole could see her hands trembling slightly, though her face remained a mask of cool resolve. Cole's initial rage had cooled, replaced by a heavy, crushing guilt. It was he who had brought this storm to her door. He had turned her kindness into a vulnerability for vultures like Preston to exploit. A few days later, the threat became reality. A courier delivered a thick manila envelope, stamped with the letterhead of one of Seattle's most expensive law firms. Cole read it with Serafina. The cold pages were filled with cruel legal terms, each word a scalpel. Impaired judgment, unstable mental state, potential endangerment of a minor, unsuitable living environment. They had twisted an act of salvation into a crime, love into a pathology. That night, Cole couldn't sleep. He sat in the darkness of the living room, looking out at the black water dotted with the distant lights of the city. The sound of Liam's steady breathing from his nearby bassinet no longer brought him peace. Instead, it was a reminder of what he stood to lose. What had he done? He had run from his own desperation only to plunge into an even worse nightmare. He had dragged his son, his innocent son, into a filthy legal battle for the rich. Liam would grow up under the flash of paparazzi cameras, his name called out in courtrooms, his life exposed and dissected because of his father's selfish decision. And Serafina, the woman who had saved them, was now facing the loss of her autonomy, her fortune, and her dignity, all because of him. The weight of his guilt became unbearable. He had to end this. He rose quietly and walked to the study where he saw Serafina's light was still on. She was sitting at the piano, not playing, her hands just resting on the silent keys. "Serafina," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and defeat. She turned, her eyes weary. "I've been thinking," he said, the words difficult to form. "And I think Preston was right about one thing. I brought this trouble to you. I can't let this continue." He took a deep breath. "Tomorrow morning, I'm taking Liam and we're leaving. We'll go somewhere no one knows who we are. Preston will have no reason to attack you anymore. The lawsuit will be meaningless. You'll have your peace, and Liam, he'll have a chance at a normal life away from all of this." It was the confession of defeated man. He was willing to go back into the darkness just so the people he cared about could be safe in the light. Serafina looked at him for a long moment, her gaze searching. He expected her to nod, perhaps with some relief, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly stood and walked to him. "No," she said, and her voice soft but filled with a steel he had never heard before. "You're not going anywhere." Cole was stunned. "But, don't you see? He'll destroy you." "Preston wants us to be afraid, Cole," she said, placing a hand on his arm for the first time, a light but steady touch. "He wants us to run, because running is an admission of guilt. But you look at me and tell me, what did we do wrong?" She looked directly into his eyes, her own blue eyes no longer holding an ocean of sorrow, but a blazing, determined fire. "Is it wrong to love a child who needs shelter? Is it wrong to save a father on the brink of despair? Is it a crime, Cole, for two broken souls to find comfort in each other?" Each question was like a bell, waking him from his stupor. "Preston isn't attacking me," she continued. "He's attacking us. He's attacking the very idea of kindness and human connection, because those are things he can't understand and can't control. If we run, we let his venom win. We tell the world that kindness has to bow to greed." She squeezed his arm gently. "I've been running in this house for a year. I'm not running anymore. This is our fight, not yours, not mine, ours, and we will face it together." In that moment, Cole no longer saw a fragile, grieving widow. He was looking at a warrior. Her strength flowed into him, extinguishing the fire of his doubt and guilt and igniting a new one, the fire of resolve. He wouldn't run. He would stay and fight for Liam, for Serafina, and for the strange, fragile, and precious family they had built together. On the day of the hearing, the Seattle sky was gray and heavy, as if holding its breath. The courtroom was cold and formal, a modern arena where words were weapons and the truth could be twisted beyond recognition. On one side sat Preston with his team of expensive lawyers, men with self-satisfied smiles and thick briefcases. They looked like a pack of wolves waiting for the kill. On the other side, Cole and Serafina sat together with their single attorney, an older woman with kind but resolute eyes. They looked like lonely soldiers against an army. Cole could feel Serafina's hand trembling slightly in his, but when he looked at her, he saw an incredible calm in her eyes. They had promised to face this together, and here they were. The hearing began. Preston's lawyer, a slick and ruthless man, painted a perfect picture with his accusations. He presented evidence of Cole's unemployment, of Serafina's vast fortune, and skillfully sowed doubt into their every action, turning kindness into a pathology and help into a shady transaction. Then it was Cole's turn to take the witness stand. Every eye in the room was on him as he walked, each footstep echoing in the silence. He sat down, taking a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. Preston's lawyer began the cross-examination, his questions sharp as knives. "Mr. Miller, is it true that you were unemployed at the time you contacted Miss Easton?" "Yes," Cole answered. "And is it true that Miss Easton, a multimillionaire, provided you and your son with shelter and all necessities, asking for nothing in return?" "Yes. So it's fair to say that you essentially traded access to your son for a roof over your head and financial stability. Is that correct?" The question, wrapped in a sarcastic tone, hit Cole's deepest fear. He felt the blood rush to his face. He saw Preston's triumphant smirk in the distance. He could say no, he could argue, but he knew his words would just be twisted again. He took a breath, looking away from the lawyer. Instead, he turned to the judge, a silver-haired woman with a stern face. "Your Honor," Cole said, his voice shaking at first but growing stronger. With all due respect, these questions, while factually correct in their details, are completely wrong in their truth. The truth isn't in these yes or no questions. The truth is in something that legal documents can never capture. The judge raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued. And what would that be, Mr. Miller? Your Honor, may I present a piece of audio? It's short, but it will explain more than 1,000 of my words ever could. A murmur went through the room. Preston's lawyer stood to object, arguing it was unorthodox, but the judge held up a hand, silencing him. Aloud, she said. Cole took out his phone, connecting it to a small speaker his lawyer had prepared. He pressed play. A piercing, painful sound filled the solemn courtroom. It was Liam's cry recorded on one of their worst nights. It wasn't a normal cry. It was the scream of starvation, of agony, of a tiny being rejecting life itself. People in the room shifted uncomfortably. The sound was too raw, too real. It was hard to listen to. Cole let it play for 15 seconds, long enough for it to sear into everyone's mind. Then, he swiped his finger across the screen. The crying stopped abruptly. In its place, a melodic, wordless lullaby began to play. It was the same melody Serafina had hummed that first night, sad but full of hope. Woven into the humming were other sounds, a soft sigh of relief, the steady, contented swallowing of milk, the quiet coos of a baby feeling completely safe. The contrast was staggering. From hell to heaven in an instant. While the peaceful audio was still playing softly, Cole began to speak, his voice now thick with emotion but perfectly clear. That, Your Honor, is the truth. The first recording was all I could give my son. Failure. Helplessness. The second recording is what Serafina gave him. Life. He looked directly at the judge. This lawyer wants to paint a picture of money and manipulation, but the truth is much simpler. My son was dying and this woman saved him, not with her money, but with herself, with her milk, with her music, with her kindness. Tears started to well in his eyes, but he didn't let his voice break. They say she's unstable because she's still grieving for her own lost son, Leo. Maybe they're right. Maybe she isn't normal, but I will say this before this court and before God. Serafina wasn't trying to replace her son. She was honoring him by saving mine. She saved my son with the most broken pieces of her own heart. He paused for a second, glancing at a stunned Preston. If that kindness is instability, if opening your arms to someone in desperation is madness, then, Your Honor, this world doesn't need any more sanity. It needs more of that exact instability and madness. When he finished, the entire room was silent. Only the gentle lullaby from the small speaker remained. The judge looked at Cole for a long time, the sternness on her face gone, replaced by something that looked like profound understanding. She shot a sharp glare at Preston, then looked at Serafina, who was crying silently with pride and gratitude. In that moment, everyone knew the trial was over. The truth had spoken in its own voice, and it was a melody that could not be denied. As Cole's final words echoed in the courtroom's silence, something shifted. The tension broke. The truth in its simple, heartfelt power had washed away the fabricated accusations. The judge, after a long, direct look at Cole, delivered her ruling. She not only dismissed Preston's petition entirely, but issued a stern warning against abusing the legal process and harming those in vulnerable situations. Preston left the courthouse with a face purple with rage and humiliation, his legal team shuffling quietly behind him. He had lost, not to a brilliant legal argument, but because he had underestimated the power of human decency. Cole and Serafina walked out of the building together. As the large doors opened, a sudden ray of sun broke through the gray Seattle clouds, illuminating their faces. It felt like a sign, a welcome back to the world, but this time in a completely different way. They were no longer two lonely, broken individuals. They were a single unit, a family forged and tested in adversity. The drive back to Bainbridge Island that day was different. There was no silence of grief or tension of fear. Instead, there was a quiet peace, an understanding that needed no words. When they stepped into the house on the Sound, it no longer felt like a gilded cage or a temporary shelter. It truly felt like home. Their home. The years that followed were not a fairy tale, but something more precious, a real, peaceful life filled with meaning. The house, once drowned in silence, now echoed with Liam's clear laughter. He grew up healthy and active, with Serafina's deep blue eyes and Cole's warm smile. His favorite thing was to sit in Serafina's lap at the piano, tapping the keys with his chubby fingers while she patiently taught him his first chords. Music was truly alive again. Serafina began composing again, her music no longer carrying a melancholic sorrow, but the complexity of life. There was loss, but also hope and love. Cole found his own purpose too. He didn't go back to being a sound engineer in commercial studios. Instead, he and Serafina co-founded a nonprofit organization called the Lullaby Project. They used Serafina's musical talent and Cole's technical skills to create therapeutic music, build community listening rooms, and help families in need, especially single parents, through music therapy. They had transformed their own pain into a source of healing for others. Their relationship grew naturally and profoundly. They didn't need the conventional labels of husband or wife. They were soulmates, Liam's mother and father, partners in life and in work. They were a family built on a foundation of respect, gratitude, and a deep love that transcended all normal definitions. One evening at sunset, the three of them were walking together on the beach just below the house. Liam, now a bright young boy, ran ahead, chasing the white-crested waves. Cole and Serafina walked behind, their hands comfortably intertwined. The sea breeze blew gently through their hair. Looking at them now, it was hard to believe they had once been broken pieces, a man on the verge of desperation and a woman imprisoned by her own grief. Their story taught us a valuable lesson. That lesson is that family isn't always made of blood. Sometimes, family is made of choice. The choice to stay when everyone else leaves. The choice to trust when the world doubts. The choice to face the storm together and to rebuild from the ashes. It also teaches us that our deepest wounds can become our greatest strengths. It was from the pain of her loss that Serafina found infinite compassion. It was from the bottom of his despair that Cole found a family he never dared to dream of. Life, like a piece of music, can have low notes, painful rests. But with kindness, with connection, those discordant notes can be woven together to create a beautiful and complete symphony. A symphony of survival, of healing, and of love in its purest form. If this story warmed your heart and reminded you of the power of unexpected connections, please subscribe to our channel, because here we believe every soul has a story worth listening to, and that even in the darkest night, a lullaby can bring back the light. Thank you for listening.